Almost there. Chapter 27, Tiana. By the time Tiana returned to the dock, Louis and Charlotte had already climbed aboard the boat, but Naveen was nowhere to be found. Tiana briefly wondered if he decided against joining him, but a moment later he came running along the pier. "Here we are," he said, holding 3 fat beeswax candles to his chest. "I've heard the bayou can get murky, even during daylight hours. Thankfully, there was someone selling these in the market." Tiana was touched by his thoughtfulness, despite the impracticality of his suggestion. She reached into her bag and pulled out her kerosene lamp. "I'm way ahead of you. Though we can use those as a backup if necessary." "You think of everything, don't you?" he said. Tiana couldn't tell if he was joking, so she just nodded. "Are we ready?" "Ready," Louis called. "Hey, Tiana, you need me to help guide you to Mama Odie's?" Tiana hesitated. Louis was not the greatest at directions. Still, he'd grown up on these bayous, and she supposed having him here would help was better than relying on her memory alone. "Start out that way," the fisherman chimed in, pointing east. "A few knots down, you'll see the entrance to the canal. That'll take you to Bayou Bienvenue. That's the quickest to Mercier, Mextent, and all the others." Tiana had no idea exactly on which bayou Mama Odie's house was located. She'd have to rely on her recollection of landmarks and on Louis. And prayers. Lots and lots of prayers. "Thank you," she told the fisherman as he untied the last of the rope from the stout, algae-covered pole and gave their boat a firm push with his booted foot. He tipped his hat to them again as they started to drift on the scummy water. Tiana grabbed hold of the long handle that stuck out from the motor, holding it steady as they traveled along the busy river. She kept the boat close to the bank to avoid the wake from any of the larger vessels. The waves they created made the grassy film covering the water resemble short, rolling hills. After about 10 minutes, she spotted the turn the fisherman had told them about. The fog, which was thicker on the water, made it difficult to see. Fortunately, as they traveled further away from the city, it began to let up, and she could see more than 2 feet ahead of the boat. Tiana could sense they were getting closer by the odors lingering in the air. The briny aroma of the river mixed with the dark vegetative smell of the murky bayou. It instantly brought back memories of the last time she had been there. She firmly shut those thoughts out of her head. It was bad enough that she had to share this tiny boat with Naveen. She would not torture herself by reminiscing about the time they'd spent together, falling for each other. "Ah, this takes me back to when I was little," Louis said. "Really? I didn't know there were bayous in Shreveport," Charlotte said. Tiana caught a glance at Louis and shook her head. Louis's family is originally from the bayous west of here," she said to Lottie. "Yeah, I grew up in parts like this," Louis added. "Once you live here, it never leaves your blood." "What made you come to New Orleans?" Charlotte asked. Tiana looked back at Louis. When she'd made the deal with the Shadow Man to allow Louis to become human, the two of them had sketched out a story about how Louis had moved from North Louisiana in search of fun and excitement in the big city. It wasn't far off from the truth. She just hoped Louis didn't say anything that would rouse suspicion. Louis gave Lottie a line about wanting to play jazz in the spot where the musical style was born, which seemed to satisfy her. Tiana breathed a sigh of relief and prayed that the subject wouldn't come up again. She would have a hard time explaining Mama Odie once they arrived at her boathouse. She didn't have the energy to come up with another story about Louis's dubious origins. The body of water they were on tampered into a much narrower canal. Large spindly tree branches hung overhead, with gossamer thin moss draping from them like a lady's fine hair. Tiana looked upward, squinting to see through the hovering fog. She couldn't be sure, but she thought this might be the place where she and Naveen had first fallen out of the sky on that fated balloon ride they'd taken a year before. She looked from side to side, hoping an eye out for the hollow tree stump where they'd hidden away from that pack of gators. A small smile tipped at one corner of her mouth as she remembered that first night, and how ridiculously out of his element Naveen had been. She glanced over at him now, taking in his strong and handsome profile. He'd changed to so much in the year since she'd first met him. He was no longer the spoiled little rich boy who thought he could get on by his looks and charm, though he'd surely won her over with that charm in the end. "Do you want to share what you find so amusing, Miss Tiana?" Tiana startled. "Huh?" You were smiling, Naveen said. He lounged against the wooden bench as if it were a velvet-covered chair in a palace somewhere. Even in the middle of the humid bayou, he had this regal way about him. Tiana figured it was ingrained in him. It was yet another example of how so very different they were. She wondered, even if she hadn't made that deal with Facilier, were there too many things about his world that made it so that she would never fit in it? It's nothing, she finally answered him. Just thinking back on happier times. Would these happier times include this morning? Before the insects, of course. He scooted a few inches closer to her and shimmied his shoulders. Did I impress you with my smooth dancing moves? Smooth? Her brows arched. Was I not? Tiana bit her lip to suppress her grin. You were... interesting. He rubbed his chin. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I've seen some pretty interesting things that were not very impressive. Quite the opposite, in fact. She couldn't hold back her laugh any longer. Entertaining. Is that better? He wiggled his hand. Not really, but I'll take it. If it makes you feel any better, I think with a little practice, you'll be dancing the Charleston better than anyone else in New Orleans. He peered over at her, a faint light twinkling in the depths of his hazel eyes. Are you offering to be my teacher? The rich cadence in his voice sent Tiana's heart thumping triple time. She rebuffed his suggestion with a shaky laugh. Now, Naveen, you should know better than to ask that. I hardly have time to think these days with as busy as we are down at the supper club. He murmured again. You know, I am pretty new to this having a job thing, but from what I've seen, most people will take a day off every now and then just for fun, and now that is interesting, yes? Prince Naveen, is that your way of chastising me for working too hard? Yes, he said. Is it working? No. Tiana. He pitched his head back and sighed up in the sky. With a hunch of his shoulder, he said, I tried. I know lately I've been working longer hours than some deem healthy, especially my parents, but it's an important time, and I have to work hard if I want my restaurant to be a success. I understand, he murmured, leaning forward. Actually, I admire that about you. Maybe you can teach me what it takes to be a success, eh? He winked. Along with how to dance to Charleston, of course. Tiana swallowed. Oh yes, his charm was as strong as ever. This trip was going to be even more challenging than she thought.